I could not be more excited for our guest we have on the podcast this week, Brent Butt. Brent, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
I'm well. I want to give this intro here. You tell me if I'm missing anything off of this. Pride of Tisdale, Saskatchewan.
Well, I don't know.
Well,
I mean, that's my hometown. I don't know how proud they are, but
6 seasons of Corner Gas plus the movie. 4 seasons of animated Corner Gas, host of the Butt Pod, decades of stand-up comedy, multiple awards won, hosted the Junos, wrote the movie No Clue, which you starred in with Amy Smart and David Koechner. How am I doing so far?
All good so far. All true.
That's good. No, super excited to have you on today. This is not on my list of questions to ask you, but is that a Spider-Man pinball machine behind you?
It is. It's a 1980 Gottlieb Spider-Man game. And when I was looking for a Spider-Man game for my little game room studio here, because this is just my garage, but I actually do a fair amount of production stuff out here. But it's also where I play poker with my buddies. And, I got a foosball table here. And I wanted a pinball game. And so I was looking around. I went to a place called John's Jukes here in Vancouver. And they didn't really have anything I wanted there. But I said to the guy, so he said, tell me what you like, and I'll keep an eye open. I said, I like sports and superheroes, and I like games that are mid-75 to mid-85. So a few weeks went by, and he called up, and he said, hey, we just got a 1980 Spider-Man Gottlieb game in. And I said, holy Christmas, we had that in the bus depot in Tisdale. I loved that game. So I went and looked. It was in great shape, and I snagged it.
That is fantastic. So growing up in Tisdale, speaking of superheroes, you a big comic guy growing up?
I was, yeah. That was the bulk of my youth. I still, I don't read. I'm not as into comic books as I was growing up. I just don't kind of have the time for it anymore. But I'm a sucker for comic book superheroes, man.
So how'd the comic Existing Earth come about for you?
It kind of came about with a buddy of mine, Colin Olexon, who was also from my hometown. He also lives out here in Vancouver now. But he and I were both comic book nerds, and we liked to hang out. And he was home from college one day. I never went to college. I don't know if you can tell by talking to me. But I was at home working as a drywaller, and he came back from college one summer. We went out for coffee, and I said to him, hey, listen, I got an idea for an 8-page filler that we could maybe try and sell to Marvel Comics, because Marvel would print these larger format magazines like Savage Sword or Conan, and without getting too technical, the type of printing press that they were printed on, had to be run in 8-page cycles, and sometimes they would need to fill it out with an 8-page filler. So I thought, here, I got this idea for a story. We could I'll draw it, we write it up, and then we try and sell it to Marvel. So I told my buddy this story. And he went away, ruminated on it. Next day, he called me up, said, let's go for coffee. And overnight, he had fleshed it out into like this epic that could go on forever. And I said, well, great. Now we'll never sell it to Marvel's never going to buy a whole series book from 2 teenage dudes in Tisdale, Saskatchewan. And he said, well, so what, do we just give up on it? I said, no, we have to start our own publishing company. And so we did. We started a publishing company and learned as we go. I had been working at a newspaper, so I knew a bit about printing, and I got a deal on the initial print run and that kind of thing. So I knew a little bit about the technical side of it, and I've always been sort of entrepreneurial. I've always been big into cannonballing in, and let's see if we can do this or not. Turns out we couldn't, but we did. We did do two issues, but it was a very surreal time because I was still living at home. It was Mom and I at home because I'm the youngest kid. Dad had passed away a few years before that. And so it was just Mom and I would have to say to her, okay, listen, Mom, if you hear me talking at like 2, 3 in the morning, don't yell up to me to see what I'm doing, because it means I'm on the phone to a distribution company in England trying to negotiate a distribution deal for our comic book. Can you imagine like a Depression era farm woman go, what the hell? She'd be like, what are you doing? What? Oh, you're crazy.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that you illustrated the whole thing too. I don't know if you can see this. Actually, hold on here. There's an artist in Saskatoon who's drew for DC and Marvel, and I was at a show he was at, and he came over and handed me this. He did Leroy Spider-Man for me. Tom Grummett is his name. So Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the name for sure.
Yeah, super good guy.
Well, this is kind of Leroy, and Leroy here, because Leroy is my middle name in real life. That's why I chose Leroy for the last name of my character. I'd made the decision, once I made the decision that all the characters' last names would be Saskatchewan town names. So we started going through and picking names for the characters, and there's a Leroy, Saskatchewan, and my real middle name is Leroy. So I thought, well, that'll be my family name then.
That's awesome. I always wondered where the Leroy name came from in the show, and I had no idea that was actually your middle name. So what other like Easter eggs were hidden in the old corner gas?
Oh, lots. I mean, I couldn't even begin to. There were lots, I can tell you that. We were always trying to fit things in, and other writers on the show, they would work in their, friends' names or stuff like that, and yeah, I can't think. I think in the Christmas episode, there's one family, their last name is Bucket, and that was I believe, I don't have this wrong, it was the maiden name of one of our writers' wives. So we were doing stuff like that all the time.
I love it. I loved corner gas. I remember. So my wife is from Massachusetts. When we met, I was trying to explain to her what Saskatchewan was like, and so I just sent her to corner gas. I said, just watch this. This is this sums up Saskatchewan. And you effectively changed the name of a town in Saskatchewan with that show. I did a couple videos in Rollo, and instantly my comments filled with, "You mean Dog River?"
Yeah. And they, while that elevator was up, they left the Dog River name up on the elevator for the whole while until the elevator finally caught fire and burned down. But yeah, they just left it up there. I think they were, sort of proud to have real life in Rollo and be known nationwide as Dog River too.
I love it. So obviously, growing up in Tisdale inspired the whole corner gas, and the coffee shop was a big part of it. You talked about the coffee shop kind of being how you crafted your stand-up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's where I sort of learned how to be funny and learned how to tell a story. At the coffee shop with my buddies, but also at home with my siblings, and my mom and dad were both funny. It's a real social sort of storytelling, and when you're joking around in a social situation like that, it always tends to build and multiply, and that sort of developed my comedy sensibilities. When I do stand up, I a lot of my other comedian friends would tease me about how many tags I would have on a joke. I would have like a lot of comedians have a punchline, and they'll set up a punchline and a tag, and I would have a setup and a punchline and a tag, and then another tag, and then another tag. And 10 minutes later, I'd do a callback to the earlier tag. And they'd be like, man, you can't let that joke go. And I'd be like, I'm still thinking of more funny stuff. That's why. And I got to fill 45 minutes.
I love that. Who were your inspirations for stand-up? Like, how did you, what point did you decide this is what I want to do?
Well, I decided I knew I was going to try it early on. I was 12 when I decided. That's the first time I heard of stand-up comedy. I'd never seen or heard stand-up comedy before. I'd seen sketch comedy and lots of sitcoms on TV, but the notion of a guy just walking out and talking and being funny was, I had no idea that was a thing. And there was an afternoon talk show that actually came from Vancouver here. It was a CTV talk show. It was initially the Alan Hamill Show. Some of your older listeners may remember the Alan Hamill Show, later became the Alan Thicke Show. It was an afternoon talk show, and they would have comedians on there. And I was home from school, summer holidays. I was 12 years old. And for whatever reason, I was always kind of fascinated by show business. I loved old movies and stuff, and way more than my buddies did. And so I saw this show come on in the afternoon. I was like, what is this? Some kind of swirly, showbiz show. And they were saying who the guests were, and they said actor so-and-so and an author so-and-so and stand-up comedian Kelly Monteith. And I was like, stand-up comedian? What is that? I knew I liked comedy. So I watched it to see what that was about. And it was a guy just walked out, in a nice looking suit and a fresh haircut, and was hilarious for 7 minutes. Just talking, and that revolutionized my life. I was like, from that moment on, that was sort of like the only thing that made sense to pursue for me, you know? Like my other two goals were to if I had to plot out a career up to then, it was either I'm going to be a comic book artist or an NHL goalie. And I learned pretty quick I didn't have the skill set to be an NHL goalie. And I was worried that, as much as I like to draw, I don't want to do it 8 hours a day, take all the fun out of it, But when I saw this guy do stand-up, Kelly Monteith, he was an American comic who moved to London, had a lot of success in the UK. He had a sitcom over there and a variety show. But he was an American guy. But yeah, that just changed everything for me.
So how'd you get started doing stand-up then?
Well, sort of from that moment on, I started thinking about comedy bits, comedy routines, kind of trying to write. I just started, I think my mind started training itself for that kind of thing. And then by the time high school came around, I first tried it in high school, at a variety night. And I went over gangbusters. I was very encouraged, and they asked me to do it again the next year. So I did it twice in high school to, very encouraging results. And then when I had moved to Saskatoon with my buddy to work on this comic book, there was a comedy club had opened up. I was 21, and this comedy club opened up, and they had an amateur night. And so I thought, well, here it is. It's the fate is all laid out in front of me. I got to go at least try to do this, because doing it in high school, for everybody kind of knows who you are. And I think they're naturally very supportive. But the idea of doing it in a club in front of strangers who have paid and have been drinking, who knows how it's going to go. But anyway, I signed up for amateur night, Thursday night, the first Thursday in February, 1988. And so this month is my... is this the first Thursday in February 2024? This might be my comedy
second Thursday.
Right
second
here.
Last week would have been the first Thursday. It would have been the
36 years I've been doing stand up for strangers in clubs.
Do you remember your first paid gig then?
Yeah, my first paid gig. I got hired to open for John Wing Jr. I drive him to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. We did a show at Diggers nightclub, and they had a comedy night. And he was in town to play the weekend at Saskatoon, and all the clubs would have satellite shows. So, you might do North Battleford and Prince Albert and maybe, Weyburn or something. And then you would come play the weekend club in Saskatoon. So they hired me to drive him to Prince Albert, open for him, do a half hour in the opening slot, and then drive him back. And I got paid $10. And I was like, holy crackers, I've made it.
That's incredible. So from that, did you ever back then, did you have aspirations of I want to be on TV at some point? I want to be in movies, or was it just stand up was the goal?
It was, yeah. Stand up was the goal, but I absolutely hoped it would spoke off into TV, because I was a TV baby. I loved TV. The notion of doing movies I loved the idea of that, but that felt more like a pipe dream. TV felt like, especially because of that Alan Thicke show, it just seemed possible. I saw lots of Canadian comedians on there. And so, when they talk about representation matters, it really does, just being a little kid in a small town, farming town in Saskatchewan, the notion of showbiz kind of seemed like a pipe dream until I started seeing, especially when you're getting so much American stuff, but then seeing, these other comedians that were from Vancouver or Toronto, they were like Canadian comedians, maybe I could do this. It suddenly made it seem a bit more real to me.
Yeah. So speaking of the TV gigs, I know you had an appearance on the X-Files. How
I did.
And I have a question about that. I just watched the scene today. Was that Patrick Renna in that scene with you?
Yeah, the kid from Sandlot.
Yes.
Yeah. He's the one who comes to life in the morgue because he's been killed with a stake through his heart. Turns out he's got some vampire tendencies. And I was the medical examiner who was examining him. So he came to life and attacked me. And that's that episode. It's in season 5 of X-Files. It's called Bad Blood, and it's consistently voted by fans as their favorite episode. And so I was down in LA one time on other business, and I was staying at a swanky hotel, and I get in the elevator, and David Duchovny gets into the elevator right behind me. And Nancy, my wife, was with me. And I said, Nancy, this is my co-star from the X-Files, David Duchovny. And so he looked over at me like, what the hell? And I said, well, maybe co-star is big. I was in one episode. And he goes, oh, really? What episode were you in? And so I told him the episode and the scene I played. And he went, well, you picked a good one to be in. That's everybody's favorite. That's he said, go look it up on IMDb TV. It's the highest rated episode. And so that's kind of funny.
So not only were you in X-Files, you made X-Files better.
Yeah, that's right. I principally responsible for its success, I think. Sure.
Much. I mean,
I came along in season 5.
Oh, that's awesome. So how did Corner Gas come about? And how did that get started?
I got a call one day from a director friend. Well, I mean, he wasn't a friend at the time. I knew who he was. We were associates. He had directed a stand-up show that I did for CBC. And anyway, he said, listen, I'm out in Vancouver. He's an Ontario guy, but he said, I'm out in Vancouver. I want to take you for coffee, talk to you about something. So we went out for coffee, and he said, listen, I was just talking to the executives at CTV. I was pitching them a bunch of TV show ideas, and they didn't like any of them. But then they said to me, hey, you know Brent Butt, right? Does he have any TV show ideas? So do you have any TV show ideas? And I was kind of on CTV's radar because I had done a stand-up special, and I was nominated for an award for Best Comedy Performance at the Gemini Awards, they used to call them at the time. Now it's the Canadian Screen Awards. But I'd been nominated for Best Comedy Performance for this show on their network. So I was sort of on their radar, and I had a track record of being a funny guy and stuff. So they were interested to know if I had any ideas. So when David asked me that, I said, well, the only idea I'm sitting on, I wrote a treatment for a TV show about a gas station in Saskatchewan, but I can't imagine anybody's going to be particularly interested in that. It doesn't sound like a real hot pitch, But he said, well, tell me about it. And I told him about it, and he said he thought it was kind of funny and interesting, could be good. Asked me if I had any paper on it. I'd written up this treatment, and he told the network about it. They liked it. I gave him a punched up version of the treatment, and they liked that. And so then we started talking, and we went from there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Over the course of Corner Gas, you had so many different people who made cameos on the show.
Yeah.
I have a favorite. Did you have like a favorite person or group of people that made a cameo on the show? Yeah.
I mean, there's a few that, like Daryl Sittler was a big one for us. Tragically Hip was a big one for us, of course. That was like, they were first up that day. We had to, we sort of had to get them in and out. They had to get to their next gig. So we recorded them at like 7 a.m. It was like first shot of the day. And they were in the studio warming up, and we were sitting there listening to them. We're like, we're just having a private Tragically Hip concert for us here in the morning.
That's amazing.
Pretty wild. They were great guys. They were a lot of fun to hang out with too. They were really, loose and joking around, and they were really, they had all the time in the world for everybody, because we had that was a day where there were a lot more people on set than actually worked there. There was a lot of people like we had never seen before with a broom coming through, like, could we get security on set here? We had a lot of stragglers.
Right. When that garage door opened in that episode and it was the Tragically Hip behind it, I was like, ah! That was, growing up in Canada, that's everybody's favorite band, right?
Some TV magic there. Wanda and Hank and Brent are standing in Rollo when the garage door opens, and the Tragically Hip are in a set in Regina.
Really?
So, and we cut the two together because we built the garage set in studio, but we had to have a real, we had to have the town actually behind us on our side of things. So we shot the scene with Hank and Wanda and Brent standing in front of a garage in Rollo. And then we came into Regina to the garage set and shot the Tragically Hip in there. So when you see that scene, it's actually shot in 2 different communities in Saskatchewan.
That's so. How much of it was filmed in Regina, and how much was actually shot in Rollo? Then
I think it was about 60% in Rollo and 40% ish. Don't quote me on that, but I would say it was roughly about that.
Yeah.
Because the gas station, was such a big part of the show, and that was on location. So we did a lot of it there, and exterior of other places. Oscar and Emma's house, the exterior was there, but the interior was in studio in Regina. The interior of the Ruby, we built duplicates. We could shoot out in Rollo, or we could shoot in Regina for interior Ruby, but almost 99% of it was in studio in Regina.
It's interesting. It's kind of cool to get the behind the scenes look at that. The other cameo I wanted to mention I loved from the show was David Suzuki, when you had him on there.
Yeah. He was worried when we picked him up at the airport. He was worried we were going to send a big stretch limo for him. And he would be like, how could I live that down? Big gas guzzling limo pulling up. But no, it was just, we picked him up in a little Hyundai or something.
That's awesome. So with you went through 6 seasons of Corner Gas, and I think it was like at its peak in its 6th season, like it was still rolling. What made you decide that's was going to be it? That 6 seasons was going to be where you ended things?
I mean, a lot of things went into it. I had just sort of kept I felt that I owed it to the show to listen to it, you know what I mean? And not just keep going for a cash grab. So by the end of season 4, I was starting to think to myself, okay, how long should this go, And the president of CTV at the time had said to me, listen, you're the one who's got to make the call on this, right? So he said, whenever you think it's time to wrap it up, it's up to you. You have to make the call, not me. He said, I can't pull the plug on this thing. It's sort of like too beloved a show. And so I just, from that moment on, I kind of kept my eyes and ears open. And I just sort of felt like by the end of season 5, I thought, yeah, we could do one more, but we should make that one more the final one and wrap it up and everybody go do other things. Because it wasn't an easy show to do. Like, we had a great time doing it, but it wasn't an easy show to do. And people, my partners were saying to me by the end of season 5, my partners were worried about my health because I was doing 17-hour days, 16, 17-hour days for 3-4 months when we're shooting. Plus, I was there away from home for another 2 months on either side. So about half my year was in Saskatchewan, and about 4 months of it was, 16, 17-hour days, not sleeping very much. And a lot of, it's just my health was suffering really from it. And, but it's also a case of like, if you're a creative person, you want to create. That's what we do. And you want to create new shows and new scenarios and tell new stories. And I think it's important that people do that. And it's easy to fall into a comfortable sort of groove and stop spreading your wings. And I don't feel like doing that. I like trying new things. I just published my first novel, and it's a dark psychological thriller. It's something nobody expected from me. It's a dark, violent psychological thriller, but the response to it has been great, but it's not what people expected from me. I just like to keep trying new things.
That's important to be able to do that. So tell me a little bit about the novel.
It's called Huge, and it's, like I said, it's a dark psychological thriller about 3 comedians on the road in the mid-90s, 3 comedians on tour. 2 of them do not have a disturbing capacity for violence. So those 2 start to realize the third person that they're with is not wired up right and is clearly capable of some dark and deadly things. And it becomes less about getting laughs and more about getting off the road alive. And so it's a story that I had kicking around in my head. It takes place in the mid 90s. That's when I was really touring small towns and like just barely eking out a living on the road. And, you would have to tour for a couple of weeks with somebody that you felt was clearly dangerous and prone to making bad decisions. And you're like, am I going to survive this road trip? And it was that sort of feeling of dread that stuck with me. And I thought that would make a really good story. And so I sort of held on to it from the mid 90s. I always wanted to write a novel. And so once I found myself no longer in production and we were in a pandemic, actually I was still in production when I started writing the novel, but we couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And I thought, now's the time. So I didn't know if I would be able to write a novel, but I knew I was going to give it a whirl. And I sat down and wrote this novel, and people liked it, and it became the #1 national bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for like 5 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Got really good reviews, and it's out in the world. If anybody likes a dark, violent psychological thriller, that's what I like to read. I like a scary read. I like a read that has either a lot of action or has a scary element to it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I wrote. And like I said, the response has been, Winnipeg Free Press and Toronto Star, and we got a lot of nice reviews from people. So I was pretty happy because, like I said, I didn't know if I could do it.
That's awesome. I want to pick up a copy of that book now. Actually, that sounds like it's right up my alley. So, I look forward to checking that out. So, in addition to being an author and an actor and a writer, you also wrote the animated series for Corner Gas. Actually, before we get to the animated series, I want to ask you about the Corner Gas movie. When you ended the show, did you know like we're gonna do a movie?
I didn't know, but we wanted to. Like I knew it would be great if we could do it. Like if we could do 6 seasons and then come back in a few years and do a movie, and that would be the cherry on top. Wouldn't that be great? And so after a couple, 2-3 years away from Corner Gas, we said, let's get together and start talking about this. And we talked about the movie, and myself and a couple of the other writers, we banged out a plot for what the movie could be, wrote it up, and then we produced it. And we thought this is going to be it. This will be the cherry on top. What a great way to end things. And it was a theatrical movie. But the problem was, if you want to call it a problem, like way too many people came to the movie. It was selling out theaters. It was hugely successful to the point where Cineplex actually called CTV and asked if they could have it, because they were only supposed to have it for 1 week in the theaters. They called up and said, could we have another weekend in the theater? Because it was doing such good business. And even my brother called me from Calgary, and he was like, I can't get into your stupid movie. It's all sold out. I was like, oh, am I supposed to be upset about that? So anyway, the success of the movie, sort of, it made the network call up and say, listen, there's clearly still an appetite for these characters in this little town. You want to do more episodes? But I didn't really want to go back and do more of the same. And also, but you like to have a job, right? So we were like, okay, well, what could we do that would sort of scratch that Corner Gas itch for people and also feel like it was good and right for us, but also be different? And, I have a background in drawing and cartooning and stuff. And so it was a pretty easy leap to say, well, what if we tried an animated version? And we didn't know if it would feel right or anything. And so I think it was a pretty smart decision. We decided to make a 3-minute version just for ourselves and see if it felt right. If it didn't feel good, we would walk away. But if it did feel right, we would maybe pursue it. And so we did this 3-minute version, and it just felt right. It just felt really good. And everybody was on board. So, I phoned around to the cast, and they were super keen. They loved the idea of just coming into the studio and doing the voices, getting to play these characters again, but not having to uproot their lives and go to another province. So yeah, we did it, and people really liked it. The response from people was great, and we ended up doing 4 seasons.
Oh, that's awesome. I love how far Corner Gas has gone. And obviously, Saskatchewan being a small place, everybody who I talked to who was whether they made a guest appearance on Corner Gas or they worked on the set of Corner Gas, you know how small it is around here. Everyone talks amazing about you and the cast and how much they loved being there. So I think it's a cool thing that you built there. It's almost like a little family you guys had there.
It was very kind of familial, and you know, the cast and the crew, and you see each other every day for long hours, and you really, we became like a family.
Oh, that's fantastic! And now you are you're getting ready to head back on the road and do some stand-up shows. Medicine Hat, February 23rd. Fort Saskatchewan, February 24th. Whitecourt, Alberta, February 25th. Grand Prairie, February 26th. And then in March, you'll be in Regina on the 14th, Merrifield, Saskatchewan on the 15th, and then back out in BC on March 16th. That's going to be a quick flight back home there after that Merrifield, Saskatchewan show there.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a direct flight from Merrifield, Saskatchewan to Vancouver. I'll have to look into that. Have my people scour into that. Yeah, it's going to be tight to make that window.
Whereabouts is Merrifield?
I'm not even sure. I think it's about 3 hours outside of Regina. I think somebody told me.
Okay, I was in Leroy, Saskatchewan, and I don't know if do you remember the story about the guy who landed his helicopter at Dairy Queen? Did you catch that news story a couple of years ago? Yeah, we were walking down the street in Leroy, and this big truck with chemicals on the back pulled up beside and yelled out, "Leroy!" Like, "Hey, how's it going?" He said, "You got to come meet my boss." And the next thing I knew, we were out at this farm outside of town, and there's 2 helicopters there. And I went, "Wait a minute." And his boss came out, and I said, "Was it you who landed at Dairy Queen?" He's like, Yeah, it was me." So he took me up, and we did a couple passes. He was a crop sprayer in his helicopter, which riding in a helicopter at 3 feet off the ground was the most terrifying experience I think I've had. But I was going to say, if you were anywhere near there, we could get him to give you a lift home.
Yeah, no, that sounds a little too terrifying. That's not my cup of tea. I don't have a very high sense of adventure.
Fair enough. So what's next, Brent? What's next on the list here for you?
Well, I'm writing another TV show that I'm hoping to sell. It's going to be another comedy, but it's sort of a darker comedy. A darker comedy with a bit of a supernatural element. So I'm working on that, and I'm writing my next novel because I really enjoyed writing Huge. Really just enjoyed the process. I didn't know if I would going into it, but after 25 years of pretty much writing just scripts, and I've always written my stand-up, but that's sort of a different thing. Writing long form prose was a lot of fun for me. I really liked it. So as soon as I was done with Huge, I started writing my next novel pretty much like 3 weeks later.
The same kind of feel in the next one you're working on?
Yeah, it'll be another sort of dark, scary thriller.
Yeah. Oh, that's
I
awesome.
read a lot of, Stephen King and Linwood Barclay and Sherry LaPena. I like stories that have sort of a creepy psychological element to them.
Yeah. I love that. Do you have, like a favorite a Canadian TV show that, whether it's one that came on after Corner Gas, or are there, standouts for you, maybe even growing up that,
I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for a show growing up that a Canadian show called Hanging In. It took place in Toronto at like a sort of a youth center that helped troubled youth. And it was like a workplace comedy. Really good jokes on that show, and it felt as good as anything they were doing in the States. And to me, as a little kid who wanted to get into TV, it was so encouraging to see that. It just seemed like a real high quality show with great actors and good laughs and like good jokes. Looked really good. Yeah, I'll always have a soft spot for Hanging In.
Hanging In. I'm gonna have to check that one out. I know for me, I got a chance to have on the podcast last year another Canadian TV legend, and that was Steve Smith, Red Green.
Oh yeah,
and, I think Red Green and Corner Gas were the 2 big standout shows for me. So this is done. My podcast is over. I don't have anyone else to bring on now, Brent.
It's all downhill now, man. Spiraling downhill now.
That's it. It's over. Don't tune in next week.
Every episode from here on in is just going to be you weeping for 40 minutes.
I think people can get on board with that.
They might dig it. You might see a little uptick.
You never know. No, I appreciate you taking time to come and chat tonight, Brent, and giving us some of your time, letting us know kind of what's coming up next. If people want to get tickets to one of these upcoming shows, where can they go?
Yeah, everything's just up on my website, brentbutt.com. Yeah, just go there and you'll see a little See Brent Live button, and it'll lay everything out on a calendar for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again,
and
Brent.
Also, while you're there, sign up. I do a fun little thing now where I send out a newsletter, and I do these. I've done this running comic strip called Heck on Earth, and I do these little video segments that I pop out. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I do those every week. So you can sign up for those at brentbutt.com also.
Awesome. I'm going to go sign up here shortly.
There's a free, to get the videos and the cartoons, it's like a paid tier. There's a free tier and a paid tier. But the response has been, people seem to like it.
That's fantastic. I love you got a lot of things on the go. Definitely keeping busy, and I'm glad you had time to squeeze us in here, and look forward to seeing what you come out with next.
Oh, thanks. Oh, it's my pleasure. Nice talking to you.